In Chapter 9, we examine the C preprocessor. Now, the C preprocessor is somewhat different to the other elements of the C language that we've been looking at before. In fact, you could go so far as to say that the processing done by the C preprocessor is really not part of the C language technically at all. That's not entirely true, because it is part of the C language. The C preprocessor is very much part of the C language definition. However, you'll find as we proceed through this chapter that it is very different to what we've already seen before in the C pre-programming language. Okay, the only way I can demonstrate that is by showing you some examples. So let's have a bit of a talk about the C preprocessor before we do. Okay. The first thing you have to know is about the C preprocessor is that it is part of the compilation process. In other words, when you attempt to compile a C file, the very first thing that happens is the C preprocessor first does its, well, processing on that file. Once the pre-processing is done, the true compilation, well, it's the compilation, but we might call it the true compilation, takes place. The pre-processing is optional. It doesn't have to be there. Obviously, the regular compilation is not optional. It does have to be there. But whether you take advantage of the C preprocessor directives that I'm going to describe in this chapter or whether you don't, the C preprocessor always gets to have a look at the C program first before the file is compiled. Okay, I still really haven't described what the C preprocessor does, and I know that, and I'm getting to that. So what it actually does, in an overview sense, is it processes the source code just by substituting one sort of text for another. And what do I mean by substituting? Well, what I'm talking about is that the word, I don't know, the word cat could be replaced by the word dog. You could substitute the word cat for dog. Now, I don't know why you might want to do that particular substitution, but that's what I mean by text substitution. And once that text substitution has been done, the compiler kicks in and compiles the file, and thus it would be compiling the word dog rather than compiling the word cat. The word cat wouldn't be there anymore, but the word dog would. Again, that's a bit mysterious as to why you ever might want to use such a thing, but I will be getting to that. The substitution of one word for another is not the only type of substitution that the C preprocessor can perform. Another sort of substitution it can do is it can take one line of code, one line of C code, and can replace it with the contents of an entire file. Now, you may not be able to imagine why that might be necessary, but I will show you some good examples of that. Anyway, let's move on. You can recognize the C preprocessor directives in the file because they begin with a hash. Do you recall any C preprocessor directives that you might have seen before? Can you think of any? We have actually been using one. Only one so far. Yes, it was the hash include directive. Now, we wrote a line of text that said hash include stdio.h. Okay, fair enough. What did that actually do? Well, that single line of code that said hash include stdio.h is removed by the C preprocessor. It's removed entirely. And in its place is put the entire contents of the file called stdio.h. And there is a file called stdio.h. If you don't know where it is, that doesn't matter. The compiler knows where it is. The compiler goes and finds it and replaces that one line of code with the entire contents of stdio.h. And after that has happened, the entire file that you were working on, like age.c or whatever it was, is compiled with all those extra lines in place. So you might have written a file that is 10 lines long, but the file stdio.h might be 100 lines long. I'm not actually sure how long it is, but it's going to be pretty big. Might actually be more than that, probably be a couple of 100 lines long. So what happens is the piece of code that eventually gets compiled is now, let's say, 210 lines long. I hope this is giving you now some indication of what I mean by text substitution, and also what I mean by the fact that it happens before the regular compilation. Okay, but I'm still going to have to give you some more concrete examples. Before I can do that, of course, I'm going to have to go into some serious detail about each of these directives. Well, at least about the first one. We'll talk about hash include first.